Hello, welcome to Everyday Experts. Let me adjust my camera. Hold on, cameraman. Yes, I'm my cameraman, so I'm technically talking to myself. Welcome to Everyday Experts. I'm your host, Red Dragon Joker. And if you don't know, that's an homage to Hannibal, one of my favorite villains. This being Halloween Eve, my favorite holiday next to my birthday. But it's still one of my favorites. And today we're going to be talking about a serious topic, but we're going to kind of mesh it up a little bit and put a little bit of a twist on it. So when we talk about mental health, there are many ideas and thoughts that go to our head when we say mental health. Crazy, psycho, weirdo, misunderstood. I'm sure when you say, mental health, you think of a family member or a friend or a coworker or someone. It's just a little bit off, where you kind of like look at them like, what's going on? What's really going on? What's the modus operandi or MO behind why you're doing the things that you're doing? They might seem a little off. They might make interesting decisions. Jay-Z once said, a wise man once told me, don't argue with fools, because people from a distance can't tell who is who. You see an argument, you see a discussion going on, and you don't know what's going on. I was prepping for the show, and yes, I actually do that. And I started thinking, how can we tie this into Halloween? Zhuzh it up a little bit, make it fun. Well, me being the agent of chaos that I am, the thought of modern day's culture, love affair with the bad guy came up. So then I started thinking, what's a villain or a bad person, or more apropos, as they're technically called, the antagonist? So what's an antagonist? A person who actively opposes or is hostile to someone or something, an adversary. And I think that's important to point out, a person who actively opposes. So we have a protagonist, which is the good guy, and an antagonist, which is the bad guy. But the whole point of the protagonist and antagonist are to oppose each other. Also, an antagonist is a substance that interferes with or inhibits the physiological action of another, which I think is another important definition. It interferes with or inhibits the physiological action of another. Why are we so enthralled with the villains? We have Thanos, Killmonger, the Joker, Ultron, who people might not like Ultron, but his message was very succinct and very clear. We have the Borg, Hannibal, the Decepticons, and Transformers, if you want to go old school, et cetera, et cetera. And all of these are a handful of villains that had strong ideals that we are understandable as realistic, as the protagonist or the good guys. So what I'm espousing as the antagonist and the bad guy, when it's as realistic as what the good guy is saying, well, that makes me start to think. Was the Joker correct when he said, what doesn't kill you makes you stranger? I submit to you that he probably was pretty close. So tonight we're going to discuss different psychologies behind the villains we love. And we're also going to talk about self-esteem and depression and how they overlap, the toll it takes on everyone, and what we can do to make it feel better, or at least what we can do as individuals, what me, my other guests do today in my roundtable to help them feel better when they are struggling. The quote, I just wish I hadn't spent so much time worrying about not being someone else's definition of enough. What's enough? Who's enough? How do you know you're enough? So, without further ado, I'm going to bring my esteemed roundtable on. And the first person, who is my discourse co-host, the namaste of all namastes, the man, the myth, the legend, the Zen master, which I don't really like that name, but he does bring a lot of good vibes. I don't need to introduce him, but as I always say, I will anyway. Mr. Glenn Caesar.
Namaste to you, my
Namaste, brother. How are you?
Doing well. How about yourself?
I'm okay.
I'm
ready to get the true chain going.
A couple of things before I pass the con. First of all, like you said, I don't like the name Zane Glenn either, but I go with it because that's what people know me by.
Yeah.
To a certain extent, that's kind of true, but in a lot of ways, it's definitely not. So there's that. The other thing, two other things. First of all, like you said, protagonist, antagonist. A lot of times we can be the antagonist of our own story and not even know it. But we'll get into that in terms of self-esteem and depression and all that other stuff later. The other thing that you picked up on, that talked about, that I picked up on, you talked about the Jay-Z quote. Another quote that I like is, a lot of times we come into situations and we sort of like are halfway or a third or whatever the way through the conversation. We don't know what's going on. We pick sides one way or the other. My thing that I've learned over the years, especially in my life in particular, is like believe none of what you see. Rather, I should say none of what you hear and half of what you see, because you have no context for all of the baggage before that led up to that particular moment in time. So you really got to dig deep and just sort of take that step back, like I said, and listen twice as much as you talk till you get the lay of the land, so to speak, and then you can go for there. But we'll talk about all that stuff tonight. So
I know.
I'm going to pass the baton, and
this is going to be a humdinger of a show. We're touching on a lot of stuff, a little bit of time. This is not an all-inclusive conversation, and it is a conversation. So we did not, and everybody will attest, I did not tell anybody what my opinion was. They did know the topics beforehand to give them a fair chance to prepare. But without further ado, future Everyday Experts guest in January. He challenged me to an intellectual duel yesterday. So, as the young kids say, bring all the smoke, Mr. Jimmy Nails.
I guess that's one way of thinking about it. I think about it as dialogue. If you want the smoke, my friend, consider the smoke brought.
Yes, that's what I like to hear. Snaps on that. Next is the thorn in my side, who is a very good friend. I'm probably the thorn in her side because I probably annoy her 20, 30 times more than she annoys me. She has helped me out many times with the show. Is very smart, very intelligent. She has recently finished her hours for her licensing in mental health counseling. So we will congratulate her when she comes on as she forays into being a licensed mental health counselor, which is a huge step in New York. One of my good friends, therapist, smart person of the highest ilk, Miss Kristen Bologna. Welcome.
Hi.
Oh,
hey. It's true. He does annoy me on a very daily basis, all the time.
Yes, thank you for that. And we just want to say congratulations again on your licensure.
Thank you.
I know that's a crazy amount of work. So
yes, time well spent.
And we have a surprise guest. It could not be a conversation, a debate, an intellectual back and forth without the captain themselves, the commander, one of the stalwarts, the backbone of the Rob Fishbeck network. There are a lot of superlatives that could describe them, but we'll just say the captain, the commander, Lego.
Oh, all.
Oh, hey, Lego.
Oh, hey, Joker.
So, let's take a couple minutes, talk about Halloween. Then Lego is going to educate us on the table. Okay, Lego's going to provide education, no experience. Mr. Get Bent, yo. I know you said yo, Jimmy, but I'm going to just say yo for everybody. So what does Halloween mean to you guys? Let's start with Jimmy.
Well, I'm a second generation weirdo. So I come from a family that was a Halloween family in a lot of ways. Like up until just a few years ago, we got a little too weak to do it. My father and I would make new decorations every year and put them out. And we got known amongst my friends as a kid for being like the haunted house to go to.
Oh, nice.
And just for a little kind of background there. My father, when I was growing up, was a dead ringer for Uncle Fester.
Oh, wow.
Love it.
So he would sit on the porch with an Uncle Fester mask on, with the bowl of candy in his lap. And when the kid would come up to take the bowl of candy, take from the bowl of candy, he'd peel the mask off and look exactly the same underneath it. And it used to scare the crap out of people.
I love it.
So I come by it naturally. And it's definitely my favorite time of year.
Yes. Oh, hey, Kat. Who can we go to next? Kristen. What does Halloween mean to you?
I feel like I have quite the unpopular opinion. I was never big into Halloween.
Take her out the show, please.
I have nothing against it. I was just never like, it was never, I don't know, I never used to like all the scary movies and all that stuff. So just naturally wasn't something I was drawn to. That's all I got. That's why I said quite the unpopular opinion.
But this is a safe place, safe space, regardless, and your opinion is welcome. I know a lot of people that just aren't into Halloween. I think if you didn't grow up with Halloween being important, then I can understand that. Because my the kids of my mother, the English version is my kid's mother, my ex-wife, she's not into Halloween. She would just give them candy every year. And I was like, so I take them trick-or-treating. It's debatable on whether they're going to go or not yet. They'll tell me tomorrow, half an hour before we're going to go, if they want to go or not. But, you know, who needs them anyway? Mr. Namaste.
It's interesting because I'm sort of, I guess you could say, of two trains of thought. When I was younger, Halloween wasn't really, I mean, it was a thing, but it wasn't a thing, like, because I was so, I guess for lack of a better way to put it, partially tied to my CP, but like super introverted. So it was very much like I would go out and have fun and all that stuff, but I was never about like quote unquote dressing up and expressing myself and like, for lack of a better way to put it, like letting my freak flag fly. But as I've grown older, I've sort of gotten, I see your look there, like I'll address that in a second. But as I've gotten older, I've sort of embraced, like, and you've heard me talk about this before, as I've grown older, I've become much more accustomed or much more open to the possibility that, like, I'm a super weirdo. I mean, I consider myself an alien. Whether other people do or not, that's a whole separate issue. But, like, because I'm an alien, I was so accustomed to, like, I guess hiding that from other people. But in terms of Halloween now, even though I don't necessarily go out and do all the trick-or-treating and all that stuff, but, like, I'm all into, like, express who you are, be you, because there's nobody better at being you than you. So I'm all into the different costumes or whatever you want to do. That's part of who you are. So celebrate that and appreciate that. And the other thing I will say is, like, although I wasn't necessarily into the scary movies, and I'm still not, like, I understand that in some way or another that gets a spark out of people or a rise or whatever you want to use. So I sort of have come into not necessarily horror per se, but just horror, or not horror movies, but Halloween movies in that sense as well. Like, that's just another avenue for me to sort of find little bits and pieces of stuff that I like and, like, add it to my repertoire of me and just being me, because there's nobody else but me that can be me. So I appreciate that. And in terms of quote unquote letting my freak flag fly, I just would say that, for lack of a better way to put it, the best way to sort of explain it is like I just said before, like, be you in all aspects of who you are, and don't ever allow yourself to be to dim your light, I guess you would say, for someone else, because if you don't shine bright, maybe you're not bright enough for other people to see themselves either. So you got to sort of be you in all facets, and that includes
hope you are recording it.
And that also includes all the quote unquote good, bad, ugly, and the blissful, because it's all you. Right, exactly. There you go. There you go.
Oh.
Why be second rate when you can be number one? Told a little bit different, but the same premise. Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Captain, as a fellow horror enthusiast, please elucidate on your feelings towards Halloween.
I'm kind of a combination of a Jimmy Nails and a Kristen. Growing up from a family that was really into Halloween, I am kind of neutral on it. I just like watching horror movies, so it's a good time. It's like the one time of year where people actually want to talk about horror movies. So this is like the one time I'm like, oh, yes, let's do that. I am open to watch
Those
it
have a
with you
question
and
for us about
conversation.
Halloween.
But in terms of the holiday, it's just, it's fine.
Okay.
It's a thing.
I've always been a fan of Halloween. I always liked it. And then when my parents passed away and Christmas and Thanksgiving lost some of the sparkle for me personally. Like, obviously my kids, the family, we do it because we have to, and you got to make it good, Santa and all of that stuff. But Halloween quickly jumped to my favorite holiday. Patty's a big fan as well. Our plan was to get engaged on. You love Halloween. Hush. That was Patty going, huh? We got engaged on Friday the 13th, and the plan was to get married on Halloween. But financially, they were trying to bamboozle us. So we just said nope. Pre-shout out to my lovely wife. Our anniversary is the 4th, coming up next week. So we'll be celebrating that. But that's how we ended up getting married on the 4th, the weekend after Halloween, and not on Halloween. So thank you for your contributions, and all of your opinions are welcomed. If I had a disclaimer, I would put it up that the opinions, expressed by Jimmy Nails are not those of the show. Yada,
I
yada.
mean, reword it.
Wow. That's some
was
rarefied company
perfect.
you just put me in.
Thank you. That's awesome.
Not to put you in Rob's shoes.
Before we
Thanks.
move on, may I say one more thing about
course.
the meaning of the holiday? That it is also, as a Satanist, it is also a religious holiday for me. Both this evening, Devil's Night, and Halloween proper are like qualified, government qualified religious holidays for Satanists.
All right. So
On that note,
the very talented. No, that wasn't dismissing what you said. I value your opinion. I'm just transitioning to the next part, and I'm sure it will come up again. Lego.
Because you've written it down, but yeah.
I didn't write it down yet, but we will talk about Jimmy's car accident. Jimmy has his own disclaimer.
I mean, it's Rob's disclaimer. It was just the retooled for the evening, one-time deal. But never forget,
Nobody
it's a
said
Rob
Rob.
disclaimer.
Nobody said Rob.
Never mind.
Nobody
He's dead
said
to me.
Rob. Lego, you have a very interesting table that talks about victim likability. I know the second part is killer personality, but let's kind of mesh it together and talk about why we're attracted to kind of villains, and explain your table in a very general
Yes.
concept. Then we'll go from there.
Okay, so as it pertains to stories, film, books, stuff like that, I think when it comes to if we're going to like a killer or root for a killer, or we can just make it more general, bad guy, it's because they, in terms of personality, outweigh how much we like the victim. So it's the victim likability to bad guy personality. So if you don't like the victim, and the killer has a big personality, you're probably going to be in this green area and you're going to root for the villain. If you like the victim and it's kind of a boring, or the bad guy doesn't have much of a personality, or you're not really on board with what they're doing, you're in the red area, which here I say not ideal. That's because I'm talking about franchises for horror movies.
Yeah.
But if you want to make it more general, if you were outside of horror films or, you know, horror in general, generally you want the good guy to win. So you're going to swap those areas out. So the red area will become the green area because that's what you want the bad guy to lose. So like in any Marvel movie, the red area is the green area. But in a horror movie, the red area is still solid red. And then as it pertains to like if you don't like the victim and it's a boring killer, or you do like the victim and you like the bad guy, the villain, then it just comes down to the sympathy and empathy. Who are you relating to more? And that's very personal to the viewer or reader or whoever.
Let's
that was
stop
not general.
right there. Thank you. That was very well explained, and I love that table. And I think we're going to talk about it again. But one of the articles I gave you guys to read, it's in the description. You don't got to read it right now, or examine, or look over, or open it and then close it like Kristen did. Examining the dark side, I thought was interesting. So there are two parts I'm going to read. Can bad be good? The attraction of a darker self is actually the name of the article. And then there's a quote. The provocative question of whether people can be attracted to darker versions of themselves. One of them proposed, if we could get past the feeling of self-threat, the perception of similarity would indicate self-relevance, drawing us to similar others despite their negative qualities. Talking about the villains, can being bad be good? I ask you first, Kristen, since you said you were not going to say anything.
I don't know. So I feel like I resonate more with the fact that like it's easier to look at like the bad things, and I feel like that's just like an overall opinion. Like it's harder for people to kind of pick out the good stuff, whether it's in yourself and other people, right? It's real easy to kind of pick out anything bad about yourself, about others. So I feel like that's kind of the first kind of sting almost, you could say. So I think that's like that first level of like attractiveness to like the villains. It's like, oh, it's bad. It's kind of like, even if you look at it in like everyday life, like people are always attracted to like not the person who's perfect and does everything right and has their life, like you're attracted to the opposite. So I kind of looked at it in that realm of like bringing it back to everyday life instead of like looking at the villains kind of in a way.
My arch nemesis for today, Mr. Nails, can it be bad? I mean, good to be bad?
Absolutely.
Please
Absolutely.
expand.
I think bad is such like a meaningless word in the grand scheme of things, and that like I'm a capital A absurdist, so I believe that like anything can have whatever meaning you give it. And I personally really gravitate to the idea of like, if someone needs a villain for whatever reason, that's a role I'm happy to fill a lot of the time. It's like why I have such an affection for Loki. He's like, y'all need a villain? All right, I'll be your villain. Like, I can do that if that's what y'all need from me. And I think part of that comes from being a minority that is looked at by, or at least until very recently, was looked at as kind of a, if not a villainous anomaly, at least a scary one. And I think I kind of embraced that in myself.
I
love it. Glenn, you were shaking your head.
No, I was laughing at the quote. But the other thing I will say is like a lot of times, because my assumption is that your question can good be bad and bad be good, vice versa. I would say absolutely yes to that, but it's probably more along the lines of what sort of I guess you could say, component, for lack of a better word,
Mm.
do you need in your life to make that wholeness or that balance? So, like Jimmy was saying, a lot of times there are people who are just like going through life looking for the quote unquote bad that they need in their life to balance out their quote unquote good. But I would say, like, who told them that all of the stuff that they have is good?
Mm.
And
Mhm.
vice versa. So
Mhm.
it's really a subjective thing in terms of your own perspective and how you view not
Mhm.
only yourself but the world around you. Like there are lots of people who um, go through life and feel like everything is terrible all the time, and no matter what happens to them, and vice versa. So it's a matter of that interplay between people or groups of people that sort of dictates, you know, a person or group of people's reality at any given time. And likewise, you can flip flop roles at any given moment as well. So you're always on a sliding scale, one way or the other, in terms of is good good or is good bad, is bad bad, is bad good, and vice
Mhm.
versa. A lot of times you're somewhere in the middle between the two, and you don't even know until you sort of stop and like ponder what's going on with me and what's going on with the people around me and what's going on in the world, and how do I sort of relate to all of that. So yeah.
Mm. Captain, what say you?
Well, Jean-Paul Sartre
Oh,
had a speech
wait.
on existentialism. I cannot quote verbatim,
Okay.
but essentially he asserted that people don't behave in a way that they perceive themselves to be bad. Every time you make a decision, you think it's the right decision. Otherwise, why would you have made that decision? Or you're at least, at bare minimum, you're making the right decision with the resources you have available and the knowledge that you have available. And it's only with hindsight that can you look back retroactively and realize, oh, that was not right, or that was not good, or that was a bad choice. And on the side, I do definitely agree with what Jimmy and Glenn were saying in that good and bad are a matter of perspective. But I feel like it's that way in two different ways. What one person might think is good or bad could be a little different than what someone else thinks. But it's also a matter of perspective in that what you're actually taking in terms of your senses. I'm sure everyone's had an experience where there was a miscommunication and you thought someone had, really did something very offensive, and the other person, you just weren't on the same page as them and they did something totally different. And so you might look at that person and think, they're, a bad person, and that person is not in reality the person that you think that they are, but because of how you perceive the incident, they could be to you. So there's a lot going on in terms of perspective, as well as, I guess, opinion, I should say.
Right. Yeah, that's what I said in terms of the sliding scale. It's always fluctuating back and forth, no matter where you are or when you are or who you're with or what have you. So it's an interesting concept to sort of, I mean, if you wanted to, you could spend your life pondering it and you'd like be old and gray and like ready to keel over just from that one particular thought. But for the most part, most people that I know don't have neither the time nor the energy to ponder that stuff, so they just don't.
And if I might piggyback off something else Jimmy said, if can good be bad and bad be good, sometimes
Jimmy, what?
doing what is seen as, doing things that are seen as bad are ultimately the best and most pure things to do. Like, look at any kind of situation where people are, just trying to advocate for their own rights, like the civil rights movement and stuff like that, where, you're, violating what are the mores and taboos and all that of our society and breaking laws, but for ultimately the best reason, but looked by that society as being bad and being aggressors.
That concept of good trouble.
Yes.
Good trouble. Okay, so we have people that actually read the homework. What's up, Ray? Yes, not bad meaning bad, but bad meaning good, Ray. Dropping knowledge. So I want to go into the psychology and why villains are so attractive a little bit. And this is going to kind of bring into our conversation, because it wouldn't be me if we didn't talk about the Joker in some context. But I do like the dynamic of Harley and Joker's relationship in the OG Suicide Squad. It brings up a lot of it brings up a lot of talking points. It brings up a lot of discussions. It brings up a lot of things on why the bad guy is so attractive, quote unquote, which I do like the quote when I was talking about the antagonist, because the antagonist role is really to be opposite the protagonist. And over time, they become the villain and the bad guy, et cetera, et cetera. So when we talk about empathy and sympathy, I was looking at the article and a couple of things that they talked about. Personality, like Lego touched on. They have to be charismatic, aggressive, smart, and lively, or else why would their followers choose to follow them? They use Loki from Marvel as an example, but Loki is a good example. The Joker's a good example. I'm trying to think of who else had a lot of people that just subscribed. I guess Thanos with the Black Order to an extent. Those are Marvel people, Kristen.
The movie version of Thanos.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Comic book Thanos motivation's really different.
Well, there's a bunch of different versions of Thanos from what I understand. I'm not a comic book head, so I'm not debating you, sir.
Yes, you are correct, Jimmy.
But the characteristics are important. So empathy is a big key when it comes to villains. Empathy is another key reason which makes a villain more approachable and relatable. Almost every villain that is widely loved outside of their film or story has some sort of tragic backstory and can even be considered a victim. So is there almost empathy when it gets flipped? So we'll talk about the Joker in a minute, but I'll use Killmonger. Did you see Black Panther, Kristen? No, of course not. He's just basically somebody who was trying to get to the same point as Black Panther. So, well, you could talk in general terms. So, Glenn, you could start us off. What say you about empathy and villains being attractive and charismatic?
Well, first of all, number one, empathy is a great thing that everyone should have, but not everyone does. So that's first of all. Secondly, empathy in terms of quote unquote making the villain more likable.
Mm-hmm.
I think part of that has to do with the idea that, going back to what I said before, a lot of times there are people who walk through life and they view things one way or a certain way, and they never sort of branch outside of not necessarily themselves, but their group of people or what have you, to sort of see the opposite side, or not even the opposite, but the many sides of the same argument that are varied and unique and equally as important. So if you don't have empathy, you're always it's always a me versus them thing, as opposed to shades of, for lack of a better word, shades of gray in terms of how you perceive things, right? So in terms of villains, like, there are lots of villains that I completely agree with up until a certain point. But once you hit that threshold, okay, now you've crossed that line to a territory where I don't necessarily agree with you or like them or what have you. But up until you get to that, it's very easy to sort of see yourself in them or in many people that you know that you relate to in one way or the other. So it's very easy to sort of, to use your analogy of Killmonger, especially when I was younger, like I would have been totally on board with him, but at the same time, it's like, how do I agree with him, but also disagree with him, and explain my disagreement to the point where he's going to understand it and not just sort of cast me into that one particular bucket or category of people that, okay, he doesn't agree with me, so therefore nothing that he says or does is valid, and therefore I can't agree with him and I have to get rid of him because he's quote unquote an enemy, I guess you would say. So yeah.
Lego, what say you on empathy versus sympathy, and kind of like the Killmonger debate, the Killmonger versus Black Panther? If you have
I brought a graph. I didn't make this one. So it's how to create a compelling villain. Your villain shouldn't be pure evil. They need a reason for their misdeeds. Show potential for evil was always there, but something triggered it. try to make the audience understand this is the empathy and sympathy thing. And the audience should feel, again, sympathy, empathy for the villain when they get their comeuppance. So that's just kind of good writing, and also capitalizing on the fact that most people do experience sympathy and empathy. In terms of characters being attractive, I know you didn't necessarily mean physically, although I do think that is a bit of a problematic situation that happens in film, in that we have these beauty standards. So when you hire someone like a Tom Holland or a Michael B. Jordan to play these characters, people tend to like people who look beautiful or pretty, and so they have more sympathy and empathy for people who they do find physically attractive. And yeah, having a good backstory, that's just good writing. Unfortunately, in real life, when you experience someone who you think is not a good person, you usually don't have that information, so it's more easy to villainize and vilify them. Yeah, which probably not good. I know you didn't. The example I have, you probably I don't know if anyone else watched this, 13 Reasons Why, which is a terrible, horrible show I absolutely do not recommend. But they tried to have a redemption arc for this kid who was a serial sexual assaulter, which I think is horrific. But a lot of people were on board with it because, again, they did hire, a young, I guess, attractive young man. And they often on screen had him being very, in no way, shape, or form, remorseful for his behavior, but he was crying. He was more Darvoing the situation in that he felt bad for himself, but he was, lamenting throughout the season. And when you see someone who is so sad, it's hard not to feel bad for them, even though this person, again, was in no way, shape, or form remorseful and not, shedding tears for their wrongdoings, but for the issues that they were now having in their life as a consequence of such. Is strange, because I think in real life, I don't think people would have any empathy for him, because they're not seeing the on-screen, like the backstory that he's been given.
Yeah, you kind of see people do the tunnel that is painted in a movie and all that stuff, but you're getting a full picture. But when you only have experiences with somebody, that's all you can judge them on. And I think people tend to be less forgiving when it comes to stuff like that, pedophilia and sexual offenders and stuff like that. Yes, that show is terrible. What is disgusting. I don't know who Bryce is.
Brittany, you get it.
KB, what say you in your just general understanding of the villains that we were talking about?
I mean, everything makes sense, obviously. I definitely agree that I feel like in order for people to be captivated almost by like the bad guy, whoever the villain is, like that's why they do it that way. Because if you're not captivated by the person, then is it going to be as interesting as if it's like somebody who's quote unquote, if you want to say like average, than somebody who's extremely muscular and has all of these charismatic features and is able to kind of pull you in with what they say and all that? It's not going to be as interesting. So it makes sense why that like the characters who play these people, like they have to be like that to kind of amp up the show, the movie, whatever it is, to make it more interesting for everybody.
Yeah, I think that when we use Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, who are the premise of Killmonger and Black Panther, if Malcolm X wasn't as gifted, in terms of speaking and stuff like that, and able to grab people's attention and get, bring people into the Nation of Islam, would he impact people as much as he did? Would they really gravitate to his message? Again, very simple, but that was the basic of the two characters. So, Mr. Nails, what say you?
You're muted. You're muted, Jimmy.
You're muted. You can't hide by not talking.
I was just looking for a link to put in the chat to illustrate something I was going to say. That concept of like sexualizing the villain goes back at least as far as like making, I guess it's going to be my thing for the day, of making Satan wildly attractive. Like, there's a specific statue from, I want to say, like 1540 that has become a meme as like the sexy Satan statue, which I'll pop a link in the chat so everybody can see it. He's beautiful, and like they never really, the good is never like gone out of the way to be portrayed as beautiful like that.
Okay, so piggybacking off of, I've heard of sexy gold.
This
So
one
piggybacking.
or not? Is that right?
No,
Is that the one, Jimmy?
was that the link, Jimmy?
I'm not getting it.
What?
Well, if not, we saw a cool statue.
Uh,
Moving on.
So kind of to piggyback on what Lego was saying about creating a compelling villain. So this is always been my premise, but is Batman a compelling villain? Go ahead, you could answer. Lego, since you're
No, he's not compelling at all. Is this where I don't know if you like Batman or not. This might be where I lose all the audience. Yeah, no, he's not compelling. He's just he's never overcome his trauma. So he's just like sitting there in this emotional state of like regression in childhood and anger and angst, and he never develops into being like a human being. It's just kind of boring. Now I said it.
Yes. What say you,
Emotionally
Kristen?
stunted.
What?
Kristen, what say you? Is Batman emotionally stunted? You know who Batman is, right?
I know who Batman is, but I don't. I got nothing more than that.
Have you seen him in a movie? Have you seen him in the TV show? You've never seen any Batman movies? All right.
No.
Wow. Okay. Glenn, go ahead.
No, I would just piggyback off what Lego said. First of all, yes, Batman is absolutely emotionally stunted to the point of, it's almost to the point of like, he revels in being emotionally stunted because then he can sort of justify all of his activity as, well, this happened to me when I was X years old and I haven't gotten over it, so now I need to make them pay for my feelings. When in truth, yes, that is an emotionally traumatic experience. Yes, it does take a toll on you. Yes, you have a lot of work to do on yourself to, so to speak, not grow out of it, but sort of like the rose that grows in concrete. You have to adapt and adjust yourself to be able to your circumstances. But at the same time, you can't necessarily, I guess, for a better way to put it is to be like, you can't use it as a crutch, like, okay, this is my one thing and I'm gonna hold on to it forever, because while you're gripping onto this thing with both hands clasped as tight as possible, all this other stuff is coming at you, whether it be good or for bad, quote unquote. You have no way of catching it because you're too busy holding on to the thing that you've held on to for so long. Whereas if you were to, even if you open up your hands a little bit, you have more leeway in terms of moving left or right or what have you to catch some other stuff and sort of perhaps facilitate that process of further opening your hands to grow, and then eventually your hands are completely open and you can catch any and everything that you choose to that's coming your way. But as long as you're here, you're never, no matter how old you get, you're still locked in this one position, and that keeps you stagnant and at that moment in time. But regardless of what you've been through in your life, you're always still here. So yeah, absolutely, Lego, you're correct. He's completely
can I add something?
Scented. Yeah, go ahead.
Of course you can add
something.
Is it
I feel like I maybe should have. I feel like I maybe should have.
Slander? No, I don't want you to. If you're going deeper, I want you to do it.
Okay. I felt like I should clarify.
No.
Obviously, trauma affects people differently, and there's some things, of course, people will never get over. Like, I'm not saying that like you should ever feel compelled to like get over this emotionally horrific thing that happened to you more quickly. That's not healthy. But to go back to what Glenn was saying, you think of something in terms of writing, they make a lot of characters who have traumatic pasts very one-dimensional. Like that one trauma has happened is their whole being. It's the only thing they ever think about, which is kind of ridiculous, and I think does a disservice to the real world.
Yeah.
And in terms of Batman, I just find it very annoying.
And that's what I was saying in terms of, no, you're not necessarily going to quote unquote get over anything, but you're going to find ways to grow in spite of, or adapt to, and change as a result of. Not necessarily hold this thing and never let it go, and that's just who you are now because that's what happened to you when you were X years old, and never grow.
Yeah, I think Lego Batman. Hold on a second, Jimmy. Sorry. I think Lego Batman is great. And I use those because they're kind of broke down to just their emotions. And I feel like Lego Batman is the best example of, I don't need to play with you. I'm just gonna keep fighting crime until there's nobody left. And it took him the whole movie to realize that he actually needed somebody. He needed the Joker. Wait, I also do just like the Donico. Put it back up.
I was just saying, in terms like most crime could be prevented if we had a better education system, and for people who are already convicts, if we intervened with education. 2/3 of people who do not read at a 4th grade level by 4th grade wind up in prison. Like, just teach people to read. It's not that hard.
Then that's smart criminals.
Yes,
Kidding. Jimmy, go ahead. I know you wanted to weigh in.
Oh, I was just gonna kind of give a summary of what Glenn was saying. That my therapist, who bless him has put up with a lot of shit from me, gave me this phrase that I love very much, which is, you may never get over it, but you can get beyond it.
Right.
And that was an extraordinarily hard lesson for me with the shit that's gone on in my life. So, like, I get Batman, but at the same time, I can acknowledge that he's stunted.
Yes, 100%. I love it. Look at this, talking about the psychology and the pathology of Batman. So now, as we move into like the self-esteem and depression part of evening events, let's talk about Suicide Squad. I don't know if Kristen doesn't know a lot of the Jokers. That's not me making fun of Kristen. She saw Suicide Squad. But I know you guys know the other Joker, so if you want to bring that in, but that's the only way they really have the relationship dynamic on TV. That's a movie. I'm not talking about like the comic books. I'm not talking about like the cartoons. So let's try to keep it to the movies as much as we can. I mean, I know if Jimmy wants to talk about some comic book that came out, or Lego wants to talk about some comic books. This is not shade. But Lego, you can start. Joker and Harley. What's your take on them? Yeah, you.
It's not a healthy relationship. To put it simply, no, it's a terrible relationship, and this is why I like the animated show. So in the animated show, Harley
is strong.
Glenn, you already shook your head.
No, I was cracking my neck.
Okay.
I wasn't shaking my head at you.
Harley,
I know, Glenn.
Split at the very beginning of the show. And the first and into the second season is really Harley kind of realizing how unhealthy, very slowly realizing how unhealthy the relationship was, and that she was kind of blinded by her feelings to the point where she was editing her own history to make him better or worse than he actually is in reality, which kind of goes back to what we were talking about with perceptions. And when she is finally kind of over him, it also does a disservice. Man, it's also bad in terms of just relationships in general. But most of TV shows and movies don't explain relationships well. But she falls in love with someone else, and that kind of pushes her to completely cut him off and really just be totally over him. But yeah, it's not a healthy relationship whatsoever. No, like that's kind of the point of it. Maybe not in the beginning, but now, with the writers now, past the 90s, in modern times, the point of the relationship is that it's an unhealthy relationship. And the point of Harley Quinn is to be someone who became what she is kind of because of, a treatment by someone, and to overcome that. Sort of the reverse of Batman. Harley Quinn is about getting beyond that abusive relationship.
And it's interesting because she's a psychiatrist and very smart, and it's almost like she is dumbed down for him to an extent. Kristen, Dr. Quinzell comes into your office for therapy. Tell me about their relationship. What's your observations?
So I totally rewatched it before this again because I hadn't seen it in so long, and I wanted to look at it from the other perspective of like really focusing on their relationship and like the traits between them. So it was less to like just watch the movie and more to like kind of like depict what I picked up on. So I feel like watching it again, he throws off like very narcissistic vibes, which makes sense because that's how he had like the charisma to bring her in and like change her, right? To put her from being a psychiatrist to Harley Quinn. And it comes across in many different ways that kind of like every time he goes to do something, he kind of like pulls her in again and stuff. And like when they're not together, she's constantly thinking about him. She's always going back to him and all that stuff. And that's what a true narcissist does. Everything is around them. It brings it back to them and stuff. So it could be very difficult if she came in because they truly change who you are, narcissists. They know exactly what to say, when to say it, where to say it, who to say it in front of. And they can be very blinding, for lack of better words.
Glenn, you were shaking your head in agreement.
Yes, first of all, obviously. Just in terms of is Joker and Harley a good relationship? First of all, absolutely not. Number one. Let's get that out of the way right away. But also the other thing I think that's interesting with Harley is like you said, Joker, she almost and seemingly purposefully chose to reject some of the things that she truly believed and understood and learned over time, simply because she felt such a, I guess, magnetic pull towards this person, which was intentional on his part, by the way, like Kristen just said. But because of that, she's chosen to shrink herself down and put herself in this box where she fits for him, but doesn't necessarily fit for herself or anyone else in the world around her. And that's why she's so drawn to him and has such an affinity for his quote unquote approval, because that's really her only source of validation, is that particular avenue that she chose to build for herself, as opposed to like in general the world around her and what have you. So I think in many ways, like Lego said, the animated version of her story is so much better because it sort of paints a broader picture of who she is as a whole. Like she goes from point A to point B to point C to point D, yada yada yada, as opposed to I'm stuck on point A and I'm just trying to figure out, am I quote unquote strong enough to move from point A to point B without constantly going back to point A to sort of reaffirm my worth or validation of I'm quote unquote good enough and I deserve these things that I'm getting from this person, as opposed to everyone else in the world. So it's interesting in that regard. But I absolutely agree with you. Like 1,000% no. Like even if you were to come into my office, and obviously I'm not a trained a psychologist or a psychiatrist, but like just hell no, run for the hills. So that's all it would be. Like no, just no.
See, I think, Jimmy, I'm gonna let you go in 1 second. I think where they are, she would be interesting to work with because I feel like the therapeutic challenge is to help people rebuild what they've lost. So I think for me personally, I think it would be very hard. And I'm not saying that that's not what you're trying. I'm not saying that's not what you're not saying, but I think that what you would bring to the table is how do you help her find herself again?
What I will say to that, and then I'll let you go, Jimmy, is like in her case, if she were to come into my, she would almost be like, I'd have to shut down the rest of my practice and specifically focus on her because there's so much to unravel that I can't devote any of my other attention elsewhere because I've just made it to go back to what I said before, point A, and we're making progress towards point B and eventually towards point C. So like to halt that process or progress, even for a little bit, would sort of be like, now I'm opening the door for her to quote unquote backslide, so to speak, and go back to where she was, and we're sort of repeating that process. Like it has to be an ongoing thing to where I would feel comfortable enough, and hopefully she would too, that she was stable enough to sustain where she was for me to actually go and work with other people as opposed to constantly devoting attention towards her. Because she did this process that goes in reverse. That's sort of how she got herself into, at least to me, how she got herself in this place is like she slowly peeled away the layers of the onion, so to speak, to get herself to that point, and didn't take any time to sort of stop and reevaluate and take stock of where she was and who she was. So you almost have to go in that reverse process to get her stable enough that she's capable of stopping, pausing, and taking stock and all that before you move forward. So it's like, I got to undo everything that you did to get you back to point, for lack of a better way, put it A or Z or however you want to use it, before I could feel like, okay, she's good. I can step back for a bit and know that's not all going to fall to pieces again. So it's interesting in that regard. Go ahead, Jimmy.
Jimmy, I know you want to say something that was, you said a lot to me yesterday. So you have a theory about the relationship. So start with that and then you can go into your explanation.
Spoiler alert for the current state of the character in media. Harley Quinn is bisexual. And I think that the Joker, her relationship with the Joker, represents something that a lot of queer people go through, which is like the last ditch. I don't care that it's not good for me. It's still better than being fill in the blank queer.
Wow. Interesting.
Wow, interesting. Okay.
That's
the relationships that Harley gets in after are leaps and bounds better and healthier without spoiling anything for anyone who doesn't know what I'm talking about.
The relationship construct you're saying is healthier, because I don't necessarily believe that like Poison Ivy is so much better than Joker.
Okay.
I'm not talking about. I am not talking about.
Okay, if you're just gonna do that,
I will
okay.
drop
I
it
was
from
trying
your
not
own
to do that,
show.
but I guess it's out.
You said what? But again, I'm talking about. You're talking about the dynamic, like the construct, like their interaction.
Yes.
Okay.
And that like Glenn was talking about like the totality of oneself versus the little box version of oneself. I think
little box version.
I will speak from my own experience anyway, because I don't want to be the spokesperson for all of queerdom here. But I think, at least in my experience,
I love it.
you have to pare yourself down as far as you can before it's uncomfortable.
Mhm.
But yeah.
Before
So
you
hold on one
break
second.
out.
'Cause
Mind blown.
I know Lego didn't like that I said that I don't think Ivy's that much better than the Joker.
Yeah, I'll fight you about
Because what's the common denominator in all her relationships? If you want to get therapy on it,
that. Villains.
You tell me.
her.
Oh,
So if you're going, and I'm not saying that I'm going to let you respond in a second, but if you're looking at the relationship dynamic, what was going on with her internally that she got broken down that much is what I would look at. You know, again, from a therapist standpoint. So their dynamic, like their interactions were better, but is she drawn to something particular that villains bring? Is it something particular that she brings? Something particular that he didn't bring? That's what I would question. But you can go ahead and respond, and you can yell at me now.
Yes.
I don't
It
think.
gives a shit
Oh,
about Harley.
Who up?
He didn't.
Oh, I'm not arguing that he did.
Well, but that's what I'm saying. Yes, there is something fundamentally better about her relationship with Ivy, in that there's like a mutual respect that was
But that's
not
what I
there.
just said. I'm not arguing that the relationship wasn't better. I'm arguing what is the thing that's drawing her to these type of people.
So that's where my argument comes in. Are you saying Joker and Poison Ivy are equally bad?
No, I'm saying they're both bad, and they have.
Disagree. But I guess it depends on what you're watching. In the media that I have indulged in, Poison Ivy, she's not very bad at all.
Okay. I haven't seen that. So again, I'm talking 100% off of relationship dynamics. And what is drawing her to people who are presented as bad, whether Poison Ivy is bad or a little bit, I don't know. But go ahead. No, go
I
ahead.
think that could kind of go on how the world sort of sees you as well, and where you're being positioned in terms of literally where you are physically. Like, generally speaking, you date someone who's around you. And if you are put in this you're labeled as this villain and you are around other villains, well, who do you know? You know other villains. So who are you going to date? Like, who is available for you to go out with? Other villains. So I think once you're at a situation when you get that label and you get put in that place, that's really all you have available to you going forward, unless you are able to remove yourself physically from that place and get relabeled as well, which can be an uphill battle. If anyone likes the movie Stand By Me, I love it. The character River Phoenix plays is labeled as a bad kid, and he's not. And because he's labeled as a bad kid, he decides kind of F it. I already have this label on me, so I'm going to do something bad. But then he feels guilty and tries to undo it and make up for it. But because it's already been done, he's already done this thing, an adult takes advantage of the situation. So he still gets that label no matter what he tries to do. It's already on him. So I think that's kind of a similar situation with Harley.
The dating pool.
That's also true.
So I would say this, and Kristen, you can chime in as the actual therapist as well. When I'm doing therapy, I'm looking at her role in the relationship. I understand what you're saying, and I'm not disagreeing with that at all. I'm looking at her role and her choices relationship-wise and seeing if there's a pattern, because being a behaviorist, I'm looking at behavior patterns and choices and decisions and how they're similar, or how are they the same thing over there. I'm just saying, like, very general, very basic. But Kristen, go ahead. What do you think?
Well, so what kind of came up for me as kind of listening to all the different sides of everything was like the scene where she saw the flash of like what they thought was reality at the time, but was from the Enchantress, where it showed her living a normal life with who was the normal version of the Joker in a house with a kid. And like, it goes back to like, that's something that she probably has always wanted, even before she became Harley Quinn and stuff. So that would be something like, if that ever came up to like really dig into, because that could kind of be how you get her back to her reality of like, this is what you wanted. This your timeline kind of changed when you met him and stuff, and like that's like her vision was like the quote unquote like happy couple, perfect life. She had a baby, they lived in a house, and all of that kind of stuff. Yeah, it's kind of what sparked hearing everybody kind of talk, going back and forth.
So what I would glean from that is probably, to Lego's point, her relationship with Poison Ivy is probably the closest to that reality or to that situation that she can get to at this point. But that's neither here nor there. Can you bring up John's quote about self-esteem, Mr. Munoz, please?
Yeah, because I wanted to talk about that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, Matt, if you can bring that up. I don't know if you saw it. He said,
rejecting all concept of self-esteem at a very young age. It hinges too much on predisposed societal expectations of normalcy and acceptability. Glenn, you can go since you had wanted to talk about it. Go ahead, sir.
If you can keep that up on the screen, because I'm gonna go lots of different places, so just have a grounding point.
You never.
First of all, the concept of rejecting self-esteem at a young age, I think, is in many ways understandable and believable, and I can sort of relate, but at the same time, I don't. Simply because, number one, and this ties into part two, like you said, it hinges too much on predisposed societal expectations of normalcy and acceptability. Well, first of all, let's address that. What's normal? What's acceptable? Who's setting those expectations for individual people that they have to conform to, like you said, like we said before, to fit in that box of, okay, this is good, this is bad. Those are two interchangeable concepts, number one. Number two, at a base level, and this is planet-wide, which we can get into another time, self-esteem doesn't necessarily mean that you feel good based upon what other people expect of you. It's simply you are good in terms of good self-esteem. You are feeling good about you because you're your own self, your own individual, and because of your positive self-esteem, you have found ways that are productive and beneficial, not only for you, but everyone else around you, which in turn makes them think that, quote unquote, you're a good person. So the idea of let's just reject self-esteem altogether, and you can either think positively or negatively about yourself or others or the people around you or the world or what have you, is a flawed concept in and of itself, because then you're projecting self-esteem on other people and changing how they perceive themselves. And I'll break this down in terms of CP because it's most apropos for me. When I was growing up, I was brought up in the Roman Church and made to believe that I just had CP because, quote unquote, that's what God wanted for me. And as a result, I didn't understand, number one, why God wanted this thing for me, because, quote unquote, based on the world around me and how people behaved towards me and with me, having CP wasn't a, quote unquote, good thing to have. And it needed to be fixed in one way or another. And as a result, because you had this thing that wasn't good or needed to be fixed, well, then you got to think, well, why did I deserve this? I don't know. Nobody told me. Nobody taught me. So then it becomes a situation of, well, somehow I'm inherently bad or wrong or less than, and that in turn impacts your own self-esteem. And you start to fall into behaviors of or patterns of behavior that they can sort of like, I think it was you, Lego, that said, River Phoenix's character. You sort of feed into the idea of, well, I had this already and there's no way I can change it, so I might as well act in accordance with what they believe since they already believe it. And in that, you're already not only are you reinforcing what they believe about you and what you believe about yourself, but you're drawing more of that, quote unquote, negative connotation or vibe or whatever, so that you're just going to attract more quote unquote bad stuff in your life, which is going to reinforce that negative self-esteem that you have anyway. So the idea of let's just reject self-esteem altogether doesn't necessarily vibe with me. Secondly, and this is the probably more important part that Joke and I wanted to talk about, if I had been taught from a young age that, yeah, I have CP, yeah, I'm different, yeah, I may solve issues or problems or whatever differently, but that doesn't necessarily put you on a pedestal higher than me or below me or next to me. That's based upon my own internal self belief and self esteem, etc. Then, and I had been taught to, because again, assuming that the baseline is you have CP, so your self esteem is low. If I had been taught ways to elevate it to the point where either I felt comfortable in my skin and equal to others, then I no longer have that quote unquote baggage that I have to overcompensate in one way or the other. And I don't fall into patterns of behavior of like, well, damn, I didn't do this well enough. And so secretly, it reinforces that negative self talk or negative self esteem, etc., that you have anyway, that you're trying to work through. So I just think that the idea of how people are going to how people are going to behave accordingly doesn't necessarily vibe. And I see your secondary comment. If you could pop that back up for me, Matt. Self-esteem doesn't exist. Well, flat out, I will. Here's the point where you'll find out that quote unquote I'm not Zen Glenn. I just disagree with you because the truth is, whether you have good self-esteem, bad self-esteem, or you fluctuate between the two, everyone has self-esteem because again, self-esteem is simply, which is what it simply or not simply if you prefer, the words and energies and feelings and emotions and powers and all that stuff that you hear me talk about all the time that you accept for you, whether they come from you internally or vocally, or they come from other people that you accept as being meant for you and you agree with them. So the idea that no one has if you didn't have self-esteem, you don't exist. And again, as you said, Matt, and to quote Joker, be an anomaly. So I can't vibe with the idea that self-esteem is sort of you live in a vacuum outside of it because everything you do in life, one way or the other, is validated or invalidated by people around you every day. So the idea that you can sort of just shun that as off as it's not important, it's not real, it doesn't matter, is to live in a state of almost truthfully self-denial. So, I mean, there's no other way I can explain that. And again, this is coming from a person who's born, raised, and grew up with CP. So I don't know how you can sort of say that what you understand in terms of CP doesn't impact people because I've literally lived it every day of my life. So I don't know. And anyone else want to say anything or go ahead, Jimmy?
I want to preface this with the fact that like I have the utmost respect for Glenn's approach and like have already established that in a lot of ways Glenn and I are like the flip sides of the same coin because we've experienced some similar things, and while he comes at those things from a place of light, I come at it from
I
more
would
of a
disagree, but okay, yeah, I do recover.
well, I hate those kind of dichotomies
Right,
because I
right, right.
think there's good in both. You know, I think there's something to the whole yin and yang concept. But like, let's use positive. You come at things from a far more positive aspect than
Not
I do.
always true, but yes, go ahead.
No, there's no arguing that, at least in my experience of you. And like, to tie things slightly back to the Joker, I believe in depressive realism.
Right.
Like I believe that, and there is some like backing to the idea, which the trained therapists can speak to better than I can. That like that I'm trying to come up with like the least possibly offensive way to put this.
If you gotta
But
be offensive, you gotta be
those
offensive. There's no.
those who accept the reality of the darkness tend to have a better like coping capacity. Like people who watch horror movies cope with the pandemic better. It's a more direct example of what I'm talking about. That there is like
Me and Lego might actually agree on the first thing. Go ahead, Jimmy.
there is an advantage to having an acceptance of the
Okay,
darkness of things.
I agree with you, but I will counter with this. I mean, that counters or whatever, but whatever. Understanding, to use your words, the darkness and the light and all that stuff. Both of those are sort of, once again, opposite sides of the same coin. And so, in many ways, and the old saying goes, the darkness can't exist without the light, and vice versa. So, yes, that's true, and absolutely, there are certain, there's validity to what you're saying in terms of people who watch horror movies and that stuff, quote unquote, have dealt with the pandemic better. However, I will say, all of that is still self-esteem.
Oh, sure.
Regardless of what you, and I'll clarify for you. Like, so like, if you accept, like, what's the best way? Like watching horror movies, like watching the things that go on in horror movies, the quote unquote darkness, so it gives you a better better ability to appreciate and understand and accept the good things in life, or the lightness, if you will, and vice versa. Yes, that's true. But at the same time, if you quote unquote have negative self-esteem or self-talk or whatever, that gives you a greater appreciation for the people who don't, and vice versa. Whereas if you have a good sense of self-esteem, positive self-esteem, good self-esteem, whatever, you're much more able to recognize when you hear stuff that doesn't align with your own positivity or self-esteem or self-talk, and recognize it, number one, within yourself and other people, and gives you more opportunity, I'll put it that way, to give you the opportunity to correct it in other people. And if they choose to accept it, that's great. If they choose to not accept it, that's great too, because it all comes down to, again, free will and free choice, and everyone is an individual and has the right to accept things for themselves or not. But again, to go back to what I said before, the idea that you can sort of live in a vacuum of, well, that just doesn't matter, it's not real, it's not important, is sort of taking yourself, I guess you would say, out of the, I guess you would say, the human experience. Because again, whether somebody likes your outfit or doesn't like your outfit, or likes your lipstick or doesn't like your lipstick, or likes the music that you listen to or doesn't like the music that you listen to, or watches the TV shows that you watch or don't watch, one way or the other, you always gravitate towards the people. In most cases, you gravitate in some sense to the people that agree with you, and you move away from the people who don't agree with you, simply because you're looking to find not only commonality, but I guess you could say equal ground and equal footing, or group consciousness, if you will, in one way or the other, on a whole host of different things. So the idea that you can just sort of detach yourself completely and live in your own space where no one affects you and interacts with you, is just not truthful, because that's not life. It's not creation. Go ahead.
I think that you made a step that I don't necessarily agree with, which is that to disregard self-esteem is to disregard people and is to disregard connection with people. I don't necessarily think that that's the case. I think you can have interaction with people and treat it like a filter where you can let the good stuff in and not. I think self-esteem has to be self-generated.
I agree with you. However, there are other ways that you can allow for that generation. Like, not everything that I've learned has been popped in my own brain. It's stuff that has sounded good and both felt right to me, which is why I'm in accordance and agreement with it. But if it didn't, then I wouldn't. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I reject them as a person in totality. But anyway, I've monopolized enough of the conversation with you, so
Yeah.
there you go. The rest of you guys can talk.
Lego, Captain.
Well, this is kind of like a nature versus nurture conversation.
Sure.
Self-esteem is something you have.
Right.
It's not a concept that you have it. As it pertains to nature versus nurture, I was going with what Glenn was saying about where self-esteem comes from and being self-generated. Sorry, that was Jimmy Nails. It is something you have, and as you experience, living in a society with other people, you as a human being will compare yourselves to other people.
Right.
That's just how being a human works, regardless of whether you want that or not. That's how your brain works. And you will compare yourselves both, or yourself, because you're one person, positively and negatively. And depending on your self-esteem level or who you are as a person, or the people you're surrounded by, sometimes that might be leaning far more towards the positive or far more towards the negative. And you as a person living around other people, you will be compared to other people, by other people, sometimes positively and sometimes negatively. That's just being part of a human. Now, as it pertains to, like, I feel like what it was John Get Bent, right? Yeah, what he was talking about is kind of more like societal expectations. Now, if you want to throw those in a hot garbage and set it on fire, totally all about it.
That I agree with.
But self-esteem is not what you're talking about, John. Like, that's a different thing. Like, I think you mislabeled what you're trying to discuss.
Kristen, you weigh in, and then I want to say something. Go ahead.
So I mean, I feel like we've gone in many different ways, and I could feel like I could kind of like piece with all of it. So something that kind of stuck with me and thinking, and it goes with like the societal expectations. I feel like when you're younger, when you're a child, you're learning things, you're learning who you are, who everybody is around you. That's kind of when the self-esteem is more kind of like imposed on you, of like, oh, This is how you should be. This is what you should be doing. And then like, as you get older and you start to form your own opinions and who you are, who other people are, that's when it becomes more of your own self-esteem. So like, kind of like when you're younger, it can be self-esteem, but it might not necessarily be yours. It's kind of like what's put out there and what's put on you. And that's what that like the expectations, the societal expectations. But as you grow, as a person in a relationship, whatever it is, that's kind of when it turns into like, okay, this is me, this is who I am. Like, some days I'm going to have good self-esteem, some days I'm not, but it's more of like you need to grow into it almost. Like, it's there when you're younger, but it's so focused on something else because that's what they've put into you when you're little. Like, oh, you have to be like this, you have to be happy all the time, these are the things you're going to do and stuff. And that's, you're little, you listen to it. So as you get older, that's when you start to form kind of like your own forms of what your self-esteem is, in a way.
So as the resident old person in the group, I will say that there are a lot of things that we learn about in therapy that are esoteric. They're not real. Like, they're things that we need to just, this is blah, 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 blah. the premise of self-esteem is that it's how you feel about yourself. So if you want to say that other people influence your self-esteem isn't important, well, when you're a little kid, there's nothing else you know. You can say it's fake. You can say it's not real. Okay, great. I'm not going to necessarily argue that point, but self-esteem it's a concept. It's how I feel about myself. It's my concept of self. Your concept of self can't be fake because it's how you view yourself. That's why I always say be an anomaly, because the society, not all of us here, because obviously all of us are quite individual. We're in a generation of likes and hearts and subscriptions and social media, and I want people to follow me. Everybody that's big, LeBron James, Beyonce, everybody, whoever you want to talk about, has an Instagram, a Facebook, or some kind of social media where they're trying to get people to like them. I understand that. So you don't have to agree with the idea that other people can affect your self-esteem, but you're not going to be, you could say it's fake. You could say it's made up. But whatever you want to call it, how you feel about yourself is a real thing. 100%. And Kristen can attest to this, and I'm sure Glenn can, and I'm sure Jimmy can, and I'm sure Lego can. I know personally from when I'm in therapy, when I'm talking to somebody in therapy, 85% of their problems is how they feel about themselves. 80 easily. That's not me making it up. That's not me making it up. If I'm talking about somebody who I'm talking to two people who are both cheated on their husband and wife, and now they're in a relationship together, and they're like, oh wow, I don't trust them. You're both cheated on the people you were with before. How do you expect to trust each other? It's a learned concept. So, and then as far as societal expectations and not liking them, it depends on what you do with the societal expectations. It depends on what you do with them. It depends on how you take them. It depends on what you glean with them. Hold on one second, Lego. So, for example, meeting Glenn and meeting Jimmy and meeting Lego, 3 different personalities. So I try my best not to put judgments and inference or whatever on people, but based on whoever. Like I found out a couple weeks ago, Lego likes to be referred to as they, them. And what have I been trying to do? Make a concerted effort to respect Lego's wishes. So that's going to build her pronouns. Their pronouns go into self-esteem, go into self-concept, go into self-definition. That's not other people's. But unfortunately, societal expectations, while they might suck, they're necessary because you wouldn't know to go against them if you didn't have them. But go ahead, Lego.
I was gonna say directly with what you're saying, and also I feel like what John Gitben is kind of trying to get at. I'm not sure, but also to tie it around to what we were talking about in the beginning with Merton's strain. I got a graph for everything, never doubt. So this is talking kind of a bit more about crime, but also about how we interact with society. So you have cultural goals, which you can accept or reject, and then you have institutional means, which you can accept and reject. So for instance, having a job, going to school are institutional means. To go against everything would be down at the bottom would be to create new goals. So like not having kids, not getting a raise, not living in a picket fence, living in a damn van down by the river, and I don't know, breaking the law to get there would be an example. But there are different ways in which you can go about a goal and have that goal be appreciated by our culture or not, if that makes sense.
A lot of sense.
Absolutely.
So, talking about kind of like bringing it home with self-esteem and depression. I'm sure we've all had moments when we just dealt with stuff. What are some things? We'll start with you, Jimmy. You've made some major strides and changes in your young life. How do you deal with we'll use societal expectations, but I called it the mental pressure of expectations from others. How do you deal with that? How do you just say, all right, I got this, or I don't got this? and I'm a shit show.
I definitely vacillate. Like, I definitely have my moments of shit show. There are people in the chat right now that can definitely attest to that reality. But I also feel like every day I become a little bit less of a shit show.
Ooh,
And like,
you're getting out of the little box version of yourself. Boom.
yes. But that was also a personal journey because I, but a handful of years ago, was in a Joker and Harley Quinn relationship where I was the Harley Quinn. And like, narcissism is bad. Like, I'm just
Full
gonna
circle.
like, falling in love with a narcissist will fuck you up. Like, that shit ruined me. And I had to like took my community, took my love, took my physical health from me. And the reference I always make in my own head is the what is it, the $6 million man, the we can rebuild him shoulder. Like, I feel like James 3.0, because James in his 30s, is way healthier than James in his 20s ever thought he could be. But it took, and this goes back to what I was saying earlier about Harley and the queer experience. It took being squeezed into the tightest little box I could possibly have been squeezed into, where all the good things about me were being manipulated for nefarious purpose.
We're gonna talk about your book after this. Just saying.
I'm working on it. Where was I going with that? Oh, that I had to be squeezed into the tightest box I could be in order to be made into a diamond. Like, I think you have to go through that and come out the other end to know anything about yourself.
Yeah. Oof. Mic drop. Bologna.
Yes.
How did you get through? What did you deal with?
I feel like I was always one to follow, we could say, the societal expectations until kind of it smacked me in the face, I guess one could say. Like after my undergrad degree, I kind of just like broke that, and that kind of changed everything. And I became crazy mature for a 21-year-old. So instead of going out and partying like everybody else, I was going to grad school. And I think that in a way took a huge toll on me, because I kind of like FOMO, like I literally felt like I was missing out on so much. And it took me like time to like recognize, like, who gives a shit about everybody else? Like, you're doing it for you and you have to do it for you. And I feel like kind of through that, I mean, there's always the ups and downs. You're always going to have them. You're always going to deal with them. It's just kind of what you do with them. Do you sit with them and let them take the best of you if it's your downs, or do you take your down and you learn from it and you go back up, kind of thing? Which is, it's just life.
Sounding Glenish. That's sounding Glenish. I see Glenn's wheels turn.
I mean, it's just, it's life. It's not all good. It's not always good. Life is not, as some people would say, perfect. There's always going to be something that's going to kind of get you down and pull you down, but it's what you do after. Do you stay down there, or do you pick yourself back up and you rebuild? And then if you come crashing down again, do you stay crashing down, or do you kind of build yourself? Like, it's a matter of how many times are you okay with, and do you want to rebuild yourself in a way?
I'll let you guys do scissor, rock, paper. Captain, Glenn?
Oh, Glenn can go first, of
Go
course.
ahead, Captain.
What was the question?
The question is, how do you get through, or how did you get through like a really tough time, or how do you get through any kind of depression or when you're really struggling?
I am one of those people that the person smiling the brightest is the saddest. You know, you fake it till you make it. You keep smiling until that smile becomes real, and you walk it off, which is probably not healthy, but hasn't failed me yet. So, no, generally speaking, I think I'm pretty good at like acknowledging the situation, whatever it is, and just kind of just breathing until, because usually like depression just feels like a weight, and it's hard to breathe, and then you just keep going, and slowly it just becomes easier until it's not affecting you anymore. And sometimes just finding a way to laugh can really just help that process, I find, for me. But that's different for everyone.
Mr. Namaste.
Okay. First of all, to go back to what Jimmy said, like, especially in my younger years, well, everyone really said, in my younger years, like, I to go back to what I said earlier, like, a lot of the onion that was me, because again, when I was initially born and growing up, everything was cool, everything was good, like I had TP, okay, cool, whatever, like, just my body, like, I didn't think anything of it. It was only until I sort of got, for lack of a better way to put it, indoctrinated into the church and my family and my friends, that I started to perceive people would look at me differently. People would talk to me or about me differently, and I would sort of figure out, well, I'm an alien. I'm not human anyway, so what the fuck does it matter anyway? But the more I started to hear that and talk about it, like, I figured out, like, okay, that there's quote unquote something wrong with me. And because, like Kristen said before, because I was younger and I didn't know any better, I just took that word, like, okay, that's for me. That's mine. I'll take that too. And I sort of built up this, for lack of a better way to put it, armor of insecurity and self-doubt and worry and stress and concern and fear of my own survival. Like, if I don't have a certain group of people around me at all times, like, how am I going to go through life? Like, what is this world going to do to me? How am I going to survive? And growing up, I sort of was able to cope with it a bit until I got in college and was on my own and no longer around all the people that I was used to being around and around all these different people. I was like, all that stuff started flooding back and came up until the point where I like fell into a 7-month long depression of sleeping late and not going to class, not eating much or eating super late or whatever the case may be. And it was only then that I sort of figured out, okay, nobody else is really going to fix this, quote unquote, for me except for me. So I started to look. I started to search and find other things that sort of, I guess, spoke to me or resonated with me, and continued on that path until I figured out, okay, the only things that are going to speak to me are things that are resonating truthfully with me because they, like I said, both sound good and feel right. And eventually I got to the point where I, got into spiritual, but I won't talk about that. But it became a thing of like every day I got to figure out, I got to go deeper inside, find that place of those places of hurt, and like what Kristen said, rebuild again, stronger, faster, better. And even a bit of that got taken down. I got to build more. I got to go deeper. I got to go farther. I got to go deeper inside and figure out the true kernel of where it all started from and build from there and build outward. And eventually I got to the point, to go back to what Lako said, it's funny, all of you sort of touched on different points of what I'm going to talk about. Like that whole idea of quote unquote fake it till you make it. Well, I would slightly alter that and say, yeah, it's not reality to the outside world, but I got to manifest it from within till it grows out and everyone else can see it. But I can see it. So I got to build that stuff, that to go back to what I said before, that self-worth, self-esteem, etc. I get to build that inner smile, I guess you would say, for me, or increase my brightness, I guess you would say, to the point where not only do I see it and feel it and believe it, but this person can see it and they start to feel it. And they may not necessarily believe it, but because they've known me long enough, they've seen me come through the other side. So they're starting to pick up little bits of it. And over time, you go through enough shit to the point where you go through enough shit where you're not necessarily feeling like shit or smelling like shit, but you know that you've got to go through shit to become the flower, for lack of a better way to put it. To yellow, flowery, and super airy, fairy, superficial type stuff. It's that fertilizer. You got to sit in the shit sometimes. Like, to go back to what we said before we went live, Jimmy talked about how this week has been just terrible for you and all sort of stuff has gone wrong. Well, why? You got to go through some shit. You got to deal with some shit. You got to sit in some shit. You got to wade your way through some shit. You got to dig out beyond the shit, so that all of the stuff that's real, that's true, you can sort of say, that was pretty cool fertilizer. I appreciate that. Yeah, it wasn't fun at the time, but I went through it. I got through it. I did well, and now here I am. So that for me, and this goes back to what I said before with Ryan Way, which I'll probably talk about on Monday. A lot of the time, you've heard me talk about CP symptoms either waxing or waning or whatever the case may be. And a lot of times it's very simple. I got to get back to digging in deeper within me. Maybe there's extra stuff that's quote unquote a blind spot to me that needs deeper healing or deeper cleansing or just addressing and like, that sucked. But I'm not going to necessarily wallow in the quote unquote that sucked feeling of it sucked, but rather acknowledge the fact that, yeah, it sucked. It was some shit that I had to sit in, maybe even to this day. But regardless, I still had that fertilizer to know that there was an other end of the tunnel to see that I had to work my way towards without necessarily like, oh, fuck, all shit's going to hell and what am I going to do about it now? The only thing you can do is to keep going. Because if you stop, to go back to what you said before, you're falling into that pattern of being emotionally stunted. So now you're still holding on to that shit at one particular moment, but you're missing all the other stuff that's flying at you because you're too busy concentrating on holding this stuff. So it's very simple for me. Like, yeah, I've gone through some bad shit. Yeah, I've got CP. The fuck am I gonna do about it except for keep working on me, keep living, keep trying to be the best me that I can be, because there's nobody better at being me than me. So that's just it. It is what it is. And no matter what anyone else says or does or thinks about me, like, I can't necessarily put myself in their shoes to sort of see what they see about me, but at the same time recognize that they don't see what I see about myself because they're not in my shoes either. So putting it in its proper perspective in terms of, again, that self-esteem and just figuring out like, okay, this is my shit. I'm glad for my shit. I'll get through my shit. And once I'm done with my shit, I'll be all finished with my shit. Until that happens there, it's got to wade through the shit. That's all there is to it, like one way or the other. So, yeah.
So, as we wrap it up, peoples, I do want to thank you all for coming on. My dear captain, say shit one more time. I dare you. Go ahead, Glenn.
Shit.
Oh. Mr. Nails, captain will be on Everyday Experts in January in successive episodes. Yes, January. Lego's going to drop more knowledge and wisdom. Kristen will be on again because I make her, and she has no choice. Mr. Glenn, you can catch us on Discourse or Clenergy or whatever. I feel like we're always talking about some nonsense that people listen to.
One way or the other, whether we want to or not.
Even if we're told about it an hour before the show, who's keeping track?
Yeah.
I found these last two quotes we're going to end with. Demonizing the world's worst criminals to the point of ignoring their human qualities may feel reassuring. But doing so will not help us understand what creates, drives, or even deters such individuals. Looking at the humanity within the world's fiends can be more unnerving than looking at their worst qualities. And yet doing so may be necessary if we hope to see the big picture and do something about it. That's about criminals. And the last one, because me and Jimmy are part of the Joker gang. Delving into the Joker's mind can be unsettling, to say the least. We're going to look at the human nature, but through the filter of fiction. And despite real-world examples along the way, we're analyzing characters to help us talk about human nature. We're not generally analyzing living people, even the recently deceased, but we are, through fiction, looking at what is the worst about most of us and most people. So, thank you, everybody, for tuning in to Everyday Experts. Matt, bring up the November slate, please, sir. Next Wednesday, the 3rd, the date changed because the 6th is me and Patty are going out for anniversary, and I'm not trying to get beat up by my wife. She will stab me. August 13th, Mr. Kramer will be on. Having a basketball roundtable November 20th, and rounding out November, we have Mr. Max Williams. Thank you, sir. So I thank you, everybody, for coming on Everyday Experts. Captain, thank you. Mr. Caesar, namaste, brother. Mr. Nails, it's okay. You did good. You stood in. Kristen, you can go to the bathroom now. So, Everyday Experts. Gang, gang, gang. Thank you. Joker out.